I think what's funny is that when we approached this, we knew we were going to do a couple episodes on this because we're like, oh, this is kind of a big story. But it was like, oh, it's kind of like one of our TrueAnon true crime stories, right?
Yes.
That's what we kind of thought going into it. We were like, oh, it's a kind of story about this sort of unsolved murder of this Italian journalist and our cameraman in the 90s. And in the background, we're going to talk a little bit about Somalia and interventions and, kind of a traditional sort of TrueAnon take on a true crime style narrative.
Yeah, like a core event that we kind of like go off in slightly different directions around, but like kind of bring it in like a narrative arc that lets us talk about some of our favorite subjects.
And then we started to get into it. And that's not what this story is.
No, unfortunately, this story has ruined my life. It has ruined, with no exaggeration, the vast majority of my time for the past however fucking long we've been looking at this. I stayed up very late working on this. The other day it was from the second I woke up to the second I went to bed, just worked on this.
Yeah.
And it's like it's like not even close.
Not even close.
We got to expand upon that in a second, but we got to get the introductions out of the way first. My name is Brace Belden.
Hello, Brace Belden. I'm Liz.
We're, of course, joined by producer
Young Chomsky.
And this is TrueAnon. Hello.
Hello. I would like to get some grievances out of the way here first. So we
airing of the
are
grievances.
I'm going to be completely, just totally, transparent about this. We are recording we're doing 2 episodes. And we were like, okay, we can do 2 episodes because I have to go do something. There's just like, we thought this was going to make sense time-wise. Schedule-wise. Like, okay, bada bing, bada boom. We're not skipping anything.
Oh, bada bing, uh-huh. Well, little spoiler alert.
And I was like, okay, like, we'll get this. It's like it's a murder mystery, but like at the core, that's what we're dealing with here. I know about some of this stuff. It's not going to be too difficult to like learn about other stuff. And it is genuinely more than almost anything we've done, except for the Utah stuff, maybe, but almost more in some ways, driven me insane.
The Utah stuff drove us insane because everyone had the same name. That was a big part of it.
Well, there's some tough names in here.
Yes, but they're also very comically tough in some instances.
Yeah.
This drove us insane existentially, I think.
Yeah. I mean, part of the problem with dealing with anything with Italy and anything in Africa in the 90s is that there's always like one more connection. There's like one more node. There's one more thing that's like kind of plays into it. And with Italy, it's tough because like, you have the mafia, you have the church, you have the government, you have, intelligence agencies, both foreign to Italy and domestic to Italy. Fascist groups, and then all 5, then they're on Freemasons, and then it's all the same thing.
Yeah. People are listening, licking their lips.
Yeah. I've said before, this is maybe not a good advertisement for these episodes. I've said before that sometimes I think that podcasts are actually one of the worst ways in human history to convey complex information. And that might be just true here. I'm not gonna come out here and say that this is going to be the easiest thing to understand in the world, the things that we're going to talk about.
And yet still we persist.
It's too late. Like we're like last.
It's not even too late. This is a crazy and also a very good story.
It is. It's a big story. It's a big story that I thought was going to be a much smaller story when Liz said that we should do an episode about this a while ago.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things that has very much sucked me in and off. And no, it hasn't sucked me off. Honestly, I've sucked this thing off, and I'm not even done. It's one of those things. I thought we would be fucking done with this, and just to get this out of the way, we're gonna put 2 episodes about this out, and then there's gonna be a little bit of a pause.
And then we're probably going to keep returning
we
to it.
We have to come back to it.
Because it's a big story.
Well, also, we just don't wrap it up, and we just can't wrap. It's just not wrapped up. It's still continuing.
We had an architecture for this in 2 episodes. They would be long episodes per TrueAnon's way. But they were going to be 2 episodes. You will still get 2 episodes. But as we dove into this story, we kept finding new names, new rabbit holes, new connections, and we had to include them because we couldn't let them go.
Yeah.
And so in doing so, we're going to be extending this out perhaps indefinitely, because I don't know where this story leads.
I mean, it's on a very basic level. It's about 2 reporters that were murdered.
Yeah.
In 1994. And on a more expansive level, it's about basically everything else that has ever happened. And it's at least that's what it feels like.
Since the fall of the Soviet Union.
A lot of this stuff on this is in Italian. This is like a big story in Italy.
Yeah, it's a really big story in Italy.
And I was sort of
very popular story in Italy because it's an unsolved double murder.
Yes, that has like what just a little bit of digging shows pretty clear connections to people connected to the Italian state or the Italian state itself,
right.
Especially considering one little memo that was sent concurrently to some of these events. I just this is gonna be a tough episode to listen to if you're like doing what people usually do when they listen to a podcast, which is like make love or like kind of put it on while you're doing your like pirouettes and practicing for the whatever the biggest ballet is.
Sure.
Or the other thing that people do when they listen to this podcast, which is operate submarines, which is the big thing. Submarines, drones. And
I don't know if I want any of those people listening to what we're talking about today.
Well, it might give them Somalia, so I mean that's what's happening.
Well, you know what? I have a lot of faith in our listeners. They're gonna get it. They're gonna get entranced. They're gonna get sucked in, and they're gonna fucking love it. So I think we should get into it.
I think we should start to just one more fucking caveat. The names in these episodes are almost exclusively the names of people from the mysterious Oriental nation of Italy and from Somalia. Now, I'm just an American who has resolutely refused to learn a second language because I speak the la lingua franca. And so if you're like, oh, you didn't pronounce that right. You didn't pronounce that right. I know that. I know how to pronounce it right, and I'm doing it wrong on purpose to fuck with you. Let's start the show.
So Illaria Alpi, a 32-year-old Italian journalist, and her cameraman, Miran Hrovatin, were driving back to Mogadishu from Bosaso, a port city in the north of Somalia. It's March 1994. Operation Restore Hope is over. 5 months ago was the Battle of Mogadishu, aka Black Hawk Down, and the U.S.-led coalition troops are packing up and going home from their unfinished mission, leaving the country retribalized and in ruin. Illaria Alpi is there ostensibly to cover the Italian withdrawal from Somalia. Illaria and Miran are just a few meters out from the Italian embassy when a Land Rover swerves in front of their Toyota pickup and a commando of gunmen jump out, brandishing Kalashnikovs. It's unclear what exactly happens next. A burst of gunshot fire, sure, but miraculously the hired driver and bodyguard are unharmed. Illaria and Miran are killed. Her body is pulled out of the back of the white Jeep, covered in blood, by an Italian-born Somali resident who goes by one name, Giancarlo. As international press swarms the scene, Giancarlo pockets the journalists' notebooks and says they were somewhere they shouldn't have been.
But where were they? They had just returned from meeting the Sultan of Basaso, Abdullahi Musa Bogor, a.k.a. King Kong, who had agreed to talk to Alpi about the Italian-Somali fishing company Shifco, a.k.a. the Somali High Sea Fishing Company. Shifco, Alpi suspected, was potentially at the center of an illegal weapons and waste trafficking line, one that spanned across Europe through the Mediterranean, across the continent, and straight to the Horn of Africa. The scope of the operation would require a lot of different hands: warlords, arm brokers, European firms, British bank, stay-behind intelligence operations, the mafia, and the CIA.
All of this would have to get pieced together later. Somalia had been used as a dumping ground for hazardous waste since at least the early 90s. Chemical, industrial, bio, you name it. Everything from cadmium and mercury to radioactive waste and uranium. And this stuff was making people sick. So sick, in fact, that pirates would famously take up where any semblance of a Somali government wouldn't. To patrol the waters, to get something back from the looting of their sea, and to set up shop making a buck off the poverty of Somalia, a place where Western governments and multinationals orchestrate chaos to manage streams of profits. And anyone who goes looking, from journalists and videographers to Coast Guard investigators and Gladio officers, all mysteriously turn up dead.
In the next episodes, we're going to walk through this story, including the unsolved murder of Illaria Alpi, but starting at the beginning with a little history of Somalia, why it became so important to Italy, what happened when the U.S. got involved, why it's such a key hub for intelligence officers, warlords, weapon dealers, and just what all this has to do with pirates. Okay, so my first question is, so Somalia is in Africa?
Yeah, where is Somalia? We should start there.
No. Let's start this. What is Africa? Okay, so Somalia. It's on the east coast of Africa. Picture Africa. All right, you got the west coast. You got the south where the white men are. You got the north where it's like it's kind of Italian up there too, but you got Libya, all these kind of play Egypt, and then you got the east, and on the little horn of Africa, there's a few different countries, some bigger than others, and one of those is Somalia.
Yeah, Ethiopia. If you're looking at Ethiopia is to its west, and then Djibouti is the little guy to the north. Kenya, you've got to the south.
Sorry, I saluted at Liz for Djibouti because we do secretly swear fealty to that nation.
Yeah, we do.
I like his tweets.
Yeah. Somalia has the longest coastline on the mainland, which is an important thing to remember. It's up against the Indian Ocean, right there. It makes it a very key. It's very key then for trade, for strategic, geopolitical reasons. It's right. It's right on the edge.
Yeah, and it's like you got Yemen across the Gulf of Aden up there. I mean, Djibouti's kind of got like the Gibraltar style position there.
Sure.
But you got Yemen up there and then Oman and then you got the Gulf and all that kind of shit. But it's in like a pretty fucking good spot, right? Like you got the big ass fucking, you got the fucking Indian Ocean that goes in the Gulf of Aden. And then, you go up straight to the Red Sea and maybe not so much these days, but it's a really important strategic shipping lane.
Yes. It's also poor as shit.
They don't have, that's the thing. Okay, one thing we got to get out of the way here. I think most people's knowledge of Somalia, if you're young, really, actually, even if you're older, is probably from the movie Black Hawk Down.
Yeah, which I have not seen.
You've never seen Black Hawk Down?
I've never seen it.
I thought about watching it for this, and then I was like, I'm good.
I watched it.
You did?
I did. Well, I've seen it before.
Is it? It's Ridley Scott, right?
I don't know. It's like one of those guys. It's a guy with like a lot of explosions. It is, first of all, we'll get to that, I guess, when we talk about Black Hawk Down.
Yeah.
It's always funny because like one of like the heroes in the movie was, of course, in real life. They're all based on real people, or most of them, was immediately, he was a child rapist.
Oh, okay.
And so they had to change his character, which I was like, that's very funny. But it's like, God, it is crazy racist. It's just it is really like a movie
I've heard
that's
like they show the Somalis as like they're like crazy horde.
It really is a movie that's like, check out these black savages over here. It's
Christ.
like that, and it's saying black in that way.
Yeah.
It is fucking crazy. And then like suddenly it'll show like a mom with her kids. It's like, oh, like she's one of the good ones. It's like crazy. But I've seen it a few times. I know what happened during the Black Hawk Down incident, like blah blah. But the movie still is like kind of just like, it's kind of hard to actually follow what's going on. It's like, well, why do you guys keep driving back in there? Do you get these guys?
Yeah, well, probably because the U.S. mission was pretty confused.
I think in that way it does function as like an amazing metaphor.
Sure.
It actually is maybe a brilliant artistic triumph because it is such an incredible metaphor for the United States invasion of Somalia and Mogadishu.
So when I say it's poor as shit, what I mean is that it is massively under-industrialized and underdeveloped. As of right now, I mean, it doesn't export more than $1 billion worth of commodities, and its top 4 agricultural products are just different types of milk. Like, it is just very, very underdeveloped.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that as like I'm saying this is because it has been a playground for colonial powers since, the 16th century.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is like, I mean, that's again, like Somalia is like oftentimes like the butt of jokes. Like, oh, if you want a libertarian government, like move to Somalia. Cause like it doesn't really have like, traditionally in the past like 30 years hasn't had much of a functioning government.
Yeah.
It's very poor. There's a lot of people who are, basically have to live like nomadic. I mean, that they have for a long time, but like nomadic existences. The cities are all fucked up.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's like sort of like the definitional failed state.
Yes. And yet it is resource rich, which, I do want to, it has iron ore, copper, salt, all of these things. We will end up talking about this later, not in these 2 episodes, but it also has the potential to be very resource rich in oil and gas. Yeah, yeah. Which is an important thing to remember. So we got to talk about the colonial history here a little bit. Unfortunately, this isn't one of those podcasts where we can be like, back in we can't talk about the entire history of Somalia and Africa. Sometimes they do that in podcasts. They're like, in this time, like Alexander, we've done that. We talked about it in the opium episode. There's too much. I think we did. I don't know. Not the one we just did, like an old ass one. Whatever. It doesn't fucking matter. We can't do that in this case. No, we're going to be moving through this as quick as we can. The first guys to show up, though, were Liz's favorites, the Portuguese. Yeah, in the 16th century. This prompts the Ottomans to kind of come over and help the Somali people fight back before the Ottomans kind of take over the joint, which is when they're the ones to kind of set up the strategically important ports, specifically in Mogadishu, through the 19th century. Yeah, basically Somalia is kind of like a collection of sultanates and what could essentially be called city-states, I guess. But a lot of different places, there's different clans that have different control over different places. Obviously, it's not highly urbanized or anything like that. There are population centers, but a lot of the population is lives kind of semi-nomadically. And then along the coast, there are these sort of small sultanates that are aren't centralized in a government or anything like that, which, fairly typical for a lot of countries that got colonized. It's around this time that the British come calling, which kind of was happening everywhere. They had we've heard you've got some 12-year-old boys there. They had just set up control over the Gulf of Aden, and they obviously were like, oh, let's take over the adjacent lands so we can maintain this incredibly important, like you said, trade corridor. Gibraltar. That connects Egypt to India. Yes. I'm sorry. I just always have to say. That's good. And by the way, when we say India like that, we are doing British colonial guy talk. That's the accent that we're doing. That is it. India. Yeah, this free. That's how they said it. India. Great book. We've gotten so far. Now we're at the Berlin Conference. That's how quickly we are moving through this. It's 1884, and this is when the colonial powers decide to divide up Africa. Now, again, for the purposes of this show, let's just talk about the Horn. The Horn of Africa, I mean. France takes Djibouti. Britain moves next door to what was called Somaliland. Italy gets what's now called Eritrea and southeastern Somalia in what was previously controlled by the Ottomans. And then Ethiopia is left independent, which annoys the Italians.
You have to put some music here.
War in the east, war in the west.
It should be noted here that Italy didn't like wholesale colonize and like incorporate Somalia as like, this is like an Italian territory, like we legally administer all of this. Like they didn't do all of that at once. Like what they did is kind of classic colonial style is they like, it's divide and conquer, but they also just like go to different sultanates and be like, we'll give you this deal. We'll sign this deal with you. We'll buy this town from you. Like, so they go around sort of like collecting treaties, which are useless to anyone who is actually from Somalia, but to the Italians, like give them this, like this legal cover essentially to start colonizing. And they start sending colonists as well, though that gets going in with greater fervor later.
Yeah. I mean, another thing to note too, and you kind of talked about this, but just to kind of hammer it home, you know, people who are considered to be ethnic Somalis, like meaning share a culture, a religion, a language, they're often divided up by clans, like you said. And those clans got further divided up by the ensuing colonial occupation, which is to say that there is a very like long history of division and tribalism among like the total population of ethnic Somalis, which is a conflict that just only gets exacerbated by the colonial occupation.
I mean, that is like classic. That's like, listen, if you're going to be a colonial guy, you got to do that, right? Like your thing that you really want to do is you want to find like a small, but not like minuscule, either religious or ethnic minority and put them in charge of everybody. Mm-hmm. And if you can't do that, you kind of just got to like flare up tensions wherever you can. I mean, that's just, I'm not saying giving advice to anyone listening to that. I'm just saying like, that's kind of the playbook that they all went to.
So the Somali people don't care much for the colonial occupation. Surprise, surprise. Resistant movements pop up. Different tribal clans are assassinating Italian leaders. The big one is the dervish movement, led by Muhammad Abdullah Hassan, a.k.a. the Mad Mullah, which I think is the nickname that the British gave him.
That really sounds like a British. Well, yeah, because he was fighting them, too.
Yes, because they were like, oh my God, isn't he so crazy? He hates colonialism. Mm-hmm. He's mad, which does feel very British. He is a Somali national hero. The dervish movement kind of comes together as the French are trying to come in and convert everyone to Catholicism, and they are like, fuck no. And this is sort of the outline of like one of the earliest nationalist movement for Somalia. He declares war on the colonial powers in 1899 and any and all collaborators, and fights a very, very successful like 20-year war against the British and the Italians. The British like can't get him. They are like really bad at it.
Yeah.
And it's a really great example of like the early kind of early guerrilla warfare, where he and the dervish armies that he had kind of assembled were hiding in caves and like doing all this kind of guerrilla style warfare. And the British, with their like massive arsenal, including like machine guns and shit, can't get to him. Mm-hmm. Until, unfortunately,
Gatling guns at that point, I guess it would be.
Okay. Well, they do finally get him, unfortunately, in 1920 with the advent of air power, and they just fucking take it all out.
I think I've talked about this book before, and this book, at this point, actually, I'm a little sick of this book, but that book, Human Smoke, has a really good kind of like early history of British use of air warfare, especially against like Africans and Arabs. I mean, famously, Winston Churchill, the gassing Arabs in the air and all that shit. We got to talk about the Italians for a second here. Well, actually, we got to talk about the Italians for like 10 fucking more hours. But we have to start talking about the Italians here. So again, the Italians have like control over southeastern Somalia. It's like a lot of the coastal stuff. They're like not too far inland there. And their control is basically like limited to these like little outposts that they have there. They technically, I'm sure, control much more area, but like really you control where your guys are, basically.
Right.
And like back then they didn't have too many guys there. However, the dervish movement collapses in the early 20s, and the Italians are like, oh, hello, hello, hello. Because back up in Italy, a little, well, not so little, a preening, corpulent freak named Mussolini decides, like, listen, we Italians have had it too good for too long. I'm about to teach you guys some discipline, and we're going to have such a good 20 years until we immediately surrender basically a week after foreigners come into the country during World War II and switch sides, and then do Captain Corelli's mandolin. So Mussolini comes to power in 1922. He marches on Rome. The 5-2 king, Vittorio, is like, oh, I guess, yeah, I do whatever you want there. But he was not alone on that march. It was a kind of like the Million Man March, except significantly less people than that. And they weren't black people, but guys wearing black shirts. And one of those guys with a black shirt was a guy named Cesare Maria de Vici, or de Vecchi probably. Who fucking knows? But he was a particularly brutal black shirt. But by the way, for those who, I don't know, didn't pay attention in whatever class they teach us in, the black shirts were like, those were the fascists. That's what they called themselves. Every country had a little shirt, and then they ran out of colors, and it got
very confusing.
It got very difficult.
Because everyone
Somehow
certainly...
America got stuck with the silver shirts, and I'm like, that's not gonna cut it. But one of the guys who helped organize the march on Rome was Cesare Maria de Vici. He was the leader of the Turin Squadrismo, which is basically like the kind of like their stormtroopers, I guess that's like the easiest analogy, but like they're like fascist gang that killed everybody, black shirt terror gang. Mussolini, though, he's like, now he's in power. He's kind of like trying to go legit. Like he gets embarrassed when his guys kill that like famous socialist guy. He's like, oh no, like I'm like like I'm a real dude or whatever. Like I'm not just like a terrorist or whatever. And so he's like, De Vecchi, we're sending your ass to Africa. And De Vecchi's like, fuck. And unfortunately, De Vecchi had been the perpetrator of this big massacre, killed a bunch of people in Turin, and so he's like, okay, I guess I've been a naughty boy. I'll go down to Africa. And he also had his own little power base, and so he had to get him out of there. So De Vecchi gets down there and is like, all right, well, my experience so far has been like a hanging anarchist in Turin. Now I'm in charge of like pacifying the sultans of Somalia. And so, okay, first thing I got to do is I got to go out of these sultanates and I got to disarm them. I just got to make sure they don't have any guns. So if they can't do anything, right? Because I've heard about this dervish guy. The dervish movement. Heard about the mullah. I don't really want to fuck with anything like that. So he's Italian, and I got to tell you, I mean, no disrespect to the Italian people. That means he immediately fails. Setback after setback, humiliation after humiliation. There are mutinies. There are battlefield defeats. His methods grow more brutal, bombing entire villages, destroying like entire families. Italy eventually rolls over the sultanates. Like, takes him like 3 or 4 years. So like he gets there, I think like 1924. Takes him about to like 1927 to like ostensibly get like full control over the area he was trying to get control of. Late 1920s, it gets a little more like formalized there. They start importing more colonists from Italy. They set up some infrastructure projects. They actually, in terms of like building stuff, they do a kind of a better job than like the Brits. I mean, I'm not defending Italian colonialism in Somalia. I'm just saying like Italy did have, I think it was like the 3rd largest like colonial empire in Africa. Obviously a lot of that in Northern Africa, but in Somalia, they do build a lot of shit there.
Which becomes important later in this story.
Yeah. One of the things, by the way, they built was concentration camps where they put people and then starve them to death. They also build big slave plantations because Italians had, up until this point, never heard of the wonderful fruit called the banana. And they start growing bananas in Somalia. Huge banana plantations that are run by Italian colonists, oftentimes staffed with forced labor, in order to bring the fruits of the colonies home under the slogan, bananas, bread of the gods. And I'm not kidding. I read this entire paper, which I will admit was basically a waste of time. It's a good paper, but really not necessary for the show because basically that's one point that I'm making. Italy went crazy over bananas in the 30s. So, like, they never heard of bananas.
I'm confused by the comparison to bread. Were they making banana sandwiches where the bananas were the bread of the sandwich as opposed to the insides?
You think that? No, but they were making banana bread. No, but they were making like there's some kind of like Somali, like you can make like a kind of banana flour.
Okay.
But really, when they're talking about bread of the gods, they're talking about bananas themselves. It's just a slogan they made up. But they
Okay.
like pretended that like bananas were it was kind of like an early Huberman style, not Huberman, but like a superfood thing. Like whatever a goji berry is.
Sure.
Like bananas were, it's like it's a superfruit or whatever. Bananas were goji berries to Italians in the 1930s.
Bananas are kind of a superfruit, though. They're very good for you.
They're my favorite fruit.
That's what the opening to Gravity's Rainbow is about.
Bananas.